Hello, my topic is all about English language learners. Mainly how we as educators can provide English language learners the best opportunities for success in the general education classroom. My research includes best practices, strategies, and some theory as well. One interesting distinction that was made in my research was the difference between language acquisition and language learning. Language acquisition is defined as occurring in a naturalistic environment, whereas language learning is more gaining knowledge through more formal classroom type environments. So the goal for, in creating this classroom environment where English language learners can really flourish is somehow creating a situation where both language acquisition and language learning can really come together and work seamlessly. A lot of my research pointed to communication and interaction as well as comprehension being the main things really that are going to allow English language learners to gain these language and literacy skills and grasp these concepts. And that might sound funny because frequently grammar and like the perfect pronunciation are, the two elements that are focused upon. And a lot of my research indicated that that should really come later, and it should really be the interactive, more oral skills getting developed, and just the comprehension of actually what you are learning to speak and read. That should be more your focus in the beginning. Another thing I found interesting that was a common thread was that researchers and educators, they've really suggested that you should allow English language learners to use their native language in the classroom when appropriate. As one of my scholarly articles, I found the mainstreaming English language learners, does it promote or hinder literacy development, pointed out when you're not allowing these students to use their native language at all, you're, as they say, they're seriously, sorry, quote, seriously being impeded from accessing the world of print. Now, of course, an implication to this would, could boil down to resources. For example, science teachers, perhaps the textbooks that are available to them, whether by their choice or it's just what the school's able to provide. If you have a Russian-speaking student and these science textbooks are not available in Russian, how can you can't really then in that case utilize your English language learners' native language. In that case, you've got to come up with other strategies. Other really useful tidbits I was finding in my research were all about how certain classroom practices actually hinder literacy development, and what a few of these are. For instance, while it is obviously very important for these students to engage in one-on-one instruction to focus on their English skills, oftentimes ESL students or ELL students, they're pulled from their general education classroom to attend these one-on-one sessions, and doing so will cause them to miss out on content knowledge from the subject area that they've just been pulled from. An example of this actually was highlighted in that same mainstreaming article. They used a subject named Rita, not her real name, and how she's, even though her English is technically improving now, she's still falling behind academically because she's been pulled from science and social studies. She attends class or the lessons twice a day, and she's pulled about halfway through science and doesn't return until about halfway through social studies, and so she's been missing out on all the content in those classes. So then what are some practices that are actually effective then rather than hindering? Another one of my scholarly resources, the What Works Clearinghouse practice guide, which I won't go over too much. Truthfully didn't get to read the whole thing. It's 134 pages, but I liked it, and I included it as one of the sources because I think it actually would be very useful in practice. It is basically full of evidence-based strategies to help kindergarten through 8th grade English language learners develop language and literacy skills. And I really like it because it includes ideas and practices from other educators and professionals, as well as researchers in the field of education. And it's designed to meet the college and career standards. So it's much more about getting, really giving these English language learning students their best chance, not just teaching them English so they can get by in school. It's no, we want you to really learn this so that you can go on to these great opportunities successfully. So in that guide, and also with other research that I did, what are some of these strategies then? One I did keep coming across as being rather popular when implemented correctly are having writing centers. And writing centers being an area really at any level where you have just a center where English language learners can work specifically on the writing aspect, since they're getting a lot of communication help elsewhere, a place where they can actually take work that they now need to put into words and get the help that they need there from peers or other educators. Now, another one of my scholarly sources, Meeting the Needs of Chinese English Language Learners at Writing Centers in America, a proposed culturally responsive model, describes these writing centers in probably the most detail, and they use Chinese, native Chinese speakers as their example. But generally, I did keep coming across these writing centers as great ways to develop proficiency. Now, of course, there's lots of implications there as well, which that article goes more into detail on. But again, it can come down to resources. What is available? What kind of tutors or help are you going to have there? Do you have native Chinese speakers so that you can, access the students' native tongue there, and Chinese, or Spanish, whatever the language may be, or then does that make it too one way? Should you have a blending? There's lots to consider. There are many more implications as well. Another interesting thought that I kept coming across in my research was that it's not even sometimes the lack of English proficiency that impedes English language learners. Though certainly it's always going to be a factor, but it's also the way of thinking and analyzing that needs adjusting in order to meet the standards here in America. For example, if we as Americans value freedom, personal success, and self-expression, and you have a student from another country, culturally, they have different priorities or different top values. Their way of expressing themselves or their way of analyzing and thinking and getting their thoughts down is going to be different, and that may also affect how well they do here. And speaking from that same cultural aspect, the other important thing to consider is that you're not even only working with the English barrier, the language barrier, excuse me, it's the cultural barrier as well. What is their social life like? What kind of academic or even emotional support do they get at home from their families? What is their story, and how can we help them there as well, which gets into culturally responsive teaching. There was a great book that I came across in looking at all this that really tied a lot of these concepts together, called Teaching English Language Learners Across the Content Areas. This book is meant to really help you determine the stage the English language learner is at. It also helps educators modify assignments and assessments still in a meaningful way, so that our English language learners are not missing out on content and can be fully engaged, while still being successful and playing to their own strengths. It even actually touches on how best to communicate with your students' families, how to reach them, how to get them involved, and how educators can also aim to learn more about their students' culture, so that they can keep helping them with their English in the classroom and reaching them. In fact, another key element from my research was all about lack of communication, both at school and with the families. A lot of my research did point to lack of communication among teachers in the same school working with the same students, as an implication to best helping our ELL students. If the general education teachers and the English as a second language teachers can't coordinate and communicate, a lot can be missed. How will they both know what is being taught, when it's being taught, and what is most important to each if they don't talk? So this is another big element to consider when best strategizing how to help our English language learners. Another way that we can best help our English language learners is through taking a step back and first helping with the phonics, the phonemic awareness of our language. Teachers should be aware of the phonemes that exist in the student's native language in order to best develop phonemic awareness in English, as phonics actually is a huge component in language instruction and learning to begin with. Vocabulary itself is another thing you really want to be developing first with English language learners. Vocabulary, my research was showing, is actually best learned through conversation, oral conversation, especially with adults. Being read to or listening to an audiobook, something of that nature, is also extremely helpful. And giving students the chance to read on their own so that they can use context clues to help them decipher vocabulary. There was another frequently mentioned finding that I found very interesting in regards to teaching English language learners. It states that actually English language learners should first be fluent in their native language in order to best learn English, which could present another implication if you do not have anybody to work with them who speaks their language. How can you access this? How can you keep promoting fluency in their native language so that they can then carry over and best see what we're looking for then for fluency in English? And speaking of fluency, another one of my sources gave a very specific project you can do with your students. Basically, in giving your students a chance to read something or recite something, such as a poem, and record themselves saying it, they can listen back to it and hear how they sound, hear where they need to implement more more inflection or change their tone or add more pause, work on their pace, things of that nature. Also, in another video, it emphasized the importance of projects, giving English language learners actual projects to work on in class with their classmates. The work should mostly be done in small group, and it should always be very hands-on. But in this way, it gives teachers the chance to really use a lot of visuals for this, and the students can use visuals, and they can really then learn to match ideas and words to ideas, ideas to words. It also gives students the chance to use their native language, which was an implication earlier, but here's an opportunity where they can use their native language if there's other students in the room who speak that language. And it also gives them a chance to learn their language, or learn English, practice with the other students in their group. The group should be mismatched in that way. This obviously promotes, gives a lot of support to those students. They have the support of perhaps other English language learners, as well as their native English speaking classmates. And for the teacher as well, it lets them move about the room and really assess how they're doing, and to pause and take the time that they might need with the students who need a little bit more help in expressing what they're trying to say, where the native English speakers might be able to be far more independent in this case. I did use one article from our readings in class for my research, Cuentos del Corazón, the stories from the heart. And I really wanted to use this one because I just thought it was so beautiful, and did actually highlight a lot of potential problems and also some wonderful things that tied together with my other research. You know, this article brought up a great point. What if the educational institution that you work at has an English-only instruction policy? But I really felt like it touched on what essentially we need to do to help our English language learners, feel welcome and feel just like they're everybody else in the classroom, because that's going to be a big challenge. And how can you learn if you don't even feel safe and respected where you are? Building, the community, building the students' confidence, all of these things, and on all methods of instruction should be based around that. So that was essentially my research. I read so much, it was hard to kind of summarize it and put it in a nutshell, but it was very, very interesting. I think these sources are great sources of information for reading just about theory and ideas, but really getting best practices as well, to really help educators connect and give our English language learners the opportunities they deserve. Where I would like to go from here in further research would be actually exploring English language learners with special needs, because I didn't cover that. I began to look into it, but that seemed like it was going to be a different topic altogether. But as all the research I did kind of assumes students without disabilities, I would really, really love to do some research on how we can best help then English language learners who do have special needs. But thank you so much for watching and listening, and I hope that this was informative and enjoyable. I really enjoyed doing this actually, and putting it together. So, and it really helped actually sync, all my research in and tie it together. So, thank you very much.